You're tuned in to the Tools of the Trade podcast.
What is up, everybody? How the hell are you? Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Colin, and I am your host, the host of this podcast, Tools of the Trade. I have a very special guest for you guys today, and he goes by the name of Tim Smith. Tim is the former executive vice president of Ellisdon, where he oversaw their buildings group across Canada. And for those of you that may not know who Ellisdon is, they are a Canadian employee-owned construction services company that was founded in 1951 in London, Ontario by brothers Don and David Ellis Smith. They are now a global company with 2,500 employees, 15 offices, and annual revenues in excess of $3.5 billion. And that is billion with a B. That is no joke, guys. Tim and I get into everything from his career progression to culture and values, the tumultuous times of the company as it changed ownership, building a personal brand, P3 projects, meditation, and so much more. Guys, keep it locked. I know you'll enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed recording it. So without further ado, let's go. So Tim, tell us how long you've been with Ellisdon.
30 years.
30 years?
Yeah.
One and only career?
I worked a couple of other small contractors before I joined Ellisdon, yeah.
Do you find that it's rare for people to stick with the same company for that long these days?
Good question. I mean, I do know a lot of people that have stuck with a firm that long. I think typically those people would have, like, it's usually a private company that has shareholdings or they have some sort of investment interest in the company. I think that's typical for the businesses that I've seen, whether they be consulting engineers or contractors. Go back to my title. I guess my title up until about a year and a half, 2 years ago was Executive Vice President of Ellisdon. I oversaw our buildings business across Canada. Stepped down from that role, became a senior advisor, and now I've taken on the role of Senior Vice President of Operations for the Toronto Buildings Group. So that's a job where I don't have to travel as much, which is primarily what exhausted me in the first role.
Be it on the road.
Yeah.
So let's say 1988. 1988 was probably when you got started?
1988 is when I joined Ellisdon. Yeah, that's correct.
And I thought it'd be a great place to start if you could kind of give us the path that you took to get to where you are today. How it all started back when you were how old?
I guess when I joined Ellisdon, I was 28. Joined the same year I was about to get married. Like I said, I graduated from university in 83. At that time, it was, jobs weren't really that plentiful. And I didn't really have a carved out career path other than I felt like I wasn't meant for the design world, and I wasn't really happy about sitting behind a desk all the time. So, and I always, as a kid, I always liked construction, and some of my summer jobs have been more practical like that. So I went to look for a job in the development and the construction business. And after some hunting, I found a job with a developer that didn't really suit me because it was more office based. And then I got a job with a smaller contractor to work on a project. That was really exciting. And then you start to network, and I think I had a couple of other opportunities. And what I really was interested in is larger scale projects, and which would give me the opportunity to, at that time, I didn't really think of it that way, but I did think of larger scale projects as giving me an opportunity to grow. But I didn't really think of it that way. I just thought it was more exciting.
What do you consider large scale?
Well, this was, decades ago, so everything would be relevant or relative to today. Today a big project is $200 million, and in the 1980s, a big project was $50 million. So, or even less, if you were able to do a $50 million project, like that was kind of a big deal, and $100 million was rare. So the scale of things is just growing with inflation and the complexity of the jobs that are out there.
And so you wanted that taste for the big jobs, and I guess Ellisdon gave you that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was interested in at the time, I was living in Toronto, and I felt like I wanted to explore other parts of Canada. My fiance at the time, now my wife, we were keen to try the West. We looked around for opportunities. The first decent opportunity that came up was with Ellisdon, but it was in Calgary. And we're like, oh, we're adventurous, young, so we moved to Calgary with Ellisdon, and that's where I started with the company, and that's where I reside today.
When we were talking, not earlier, I guess this was a couple weeks ago as we were kind of formulating this episode, you mentioned to me a particular point in time where you were working in Vancouver and you were approached to take over operations.
Yeah, I was running a project as a superintendent, and that's what I'd been doing for, I guess, about 8 years, and at Ellisdon, and I had field experience before that prior to joining Ellisdon, and I was on a project, and Don Smith, who was the founder of Ellisdon, still active in the company at that time, he was touring the area, and it was always a big deal if Don came on the job, and everybody, he had quite a reputation, so people would prepare themselves properly because he.
What do you mean by quite a reputation?
His reputation was, he fired a lot of people, and that was sort of, as an employee, you're kind of thinking, why is he coming here? There must be something dramatically bad. But, myself and the project manager, we were younger guys at the time, say, well, everything's going well. What possibly, why would he come here? So he came there, and it was he was with his son, Michael, at the time. And, he was walking around, we were talking, and he said, he referenced the boss of the business in Vancouver, and he said, do you know, I'm not going to mention the poor guy's name, do you know so-and-so? And I said, yeah, of course I do. He's my boss. He goes, not anymore. I go, well, what happened? He goes, he got fired. I'm like, he got fired? I fired him. And then I said, oh, why are you telling me that? Because he goes, well, I want you to take that job. And I said something, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I think I stumbled. I was taken aback because, imagine going from running a project, as a superintendent, not that you don't understand how to build, like I certainly did, but I certainly was skipping a few steps to run a business. And I said, I don't know if I said, I don't know if that's a good idea or if I'm ready for that job. And his words were, well, you can take that job or you don't have a job. So that was the motivation I needed, and away I went. So it took me a few weeks to get organized. I had still to finish that project and put somebody in place. It was nearly done. And, then I started. That was 1990, I want to say 92 or 93, maybe 92 or 93, something like that. Say 93. And, I just kind of learned. There was a core group of people, and I think probably most of them were thinking, how could you possibly put that guy in the job? Like, other people with more practical experience than me. But, what I reflect back now, and I think, well, somebody saw something in me that would have allowed them to bet on me to survive, and I was at that point only considering survival. I wasn't thinking about thriving.
What do you think that was, reflecting back on it now? Maybe not who saw something in you, but what do you think was seen in you that allowed you or afforded you to have that position and be approached by him to say that to you?
Well, I think, first and foremost, and I think you and I have talked about this before, like any business, the construction business is, it's a profit and loss business, and in order to do great things and to continue to grow your business, you have to make money. And I had been fortunate that the projects that I'd been on were successful financially. So and the relationships that I had created, both with the design firms and the people that work there and the clients and the subcontractors were all positive. And I think what, beyond the fact that I was competent, my people skills were probably what got me noticed and gave me the opportunity. And, I think that was really it.
So then you take this role, and you are, at that point, you're managing the BC branch of business?
That's correct, yeah.
And what type of projects were you overseeing at that point in time? Like, what does a day-to-day look like for somebody that's in a position to manage a business unit of a province?
Well, your primary role is to find business opportunities and pursue them, whether they're price competitions like public tenders, or they're negotiated, or they're design build, or the biggest part of your job is to find out what the opportunities are, and then find a way for your firm to be competitive. Whether that's competitive because it's a competition on what value you bring, the skills or unique skills of your individual people. You just had to find a way to compete. Now, I think of myself as being competitive, but you're competing at a different level. You're competing with your intellect. It's determination will get you so far, but you do need experience. You do need to understand, what is the buyer looking for? What does the buyer of construction services really want? And that's a hard, or not, it's a steep hill of learning to get up really quickly when you go from, I understand construction and the bricks and mortars and concrete and rebar and the mechanical and electrical systems, to all of a sudden become like a marketing know-it-all. So, I had to listen, I had to fail a lot. I had to take advice, sort through advice, and find allies. And, you just got to be determined to keep getting yourself up and going the next day. And, sometimes that's hard because you don't have experience, you don't have a track record. It's hard to keep your self-confidence up because you don't have wins. You just have a bunch of attempts. And, but the one thing I knew was, projects cost a certain amount of money and they take a certain amount of time. And I think I had a good understanding of that. And I was never going to compromise the realities of cost and time in order to get work. In other words, I wasn't going to make an error on a budget or an estimate, or telling a client it'll take 20 months when it was really going to take 24. I was comfortable in that space, and I think that probably hurt me early on, but it probably also saved me, that I didn't offer up services we couldn't deliver. So I think curse and a blessing maybe all at once.
What was, looking back on that period of time, now if you're to drive anywhere in Canada, you're going to see a blue flag with an Ellisdon sign, Ellisdon symbol on it. I don't think that I can go anywhere in Toronto without seeing one. And in Vancouver is pretty much the same. Every fifth or sixth building that you drive past has an Ellisdon sign on it. So if you take yourself back to that point in time, did Ellisdon have the same weight that it does now? And did that help you push forward? Or had they not quite reached that breakover point yet?
I think at that time when I was managing the business in Vancouver, and I use that term loosely because I looked at the experience I had then versus what I know now. And you want to talk about embarrassing moments. I was like way over my head, and I guess I was in survival mode at that point. But that being said, the market was completely different at that time. There was, it was more traditional insofar as, there was still publicly tendered work. So design, bid, build was still a model pretty dominant. And I think that was relatively the same across Canada. And Ellisdon, quite frankly, was more of a bid build type company. As the market more evolved into more relationship-based construction management, providing pre-construction services and bringing value. So it was a value-based assessment on who won the contracts. Ellisdon evolved in that space. So I guess to answer your question, the Canadian market was smaller, and the BC market was parallel to that, very much smaller. And Ellisdon was a smaller company. And I think Ellisdon was beginning its evolution to become more of a full construction service provider. So, but all the things that we rely on today, the brand that you see and the brand that everybody loves that works at Ellisdon is, we're builders and we know how to build a building. And I think that comes from generations and generations of builders that have built their careers here. And, everybody that has a great career here today owes that to the people that succeeded them, we're kind of riding on the coattails of everybody before us.
Right.
A little bit. Yeah.
And I know just from my own personal interest in the company and my own research that Ellisdon reached a point in its career where it almost wasn't a company anymore. And it kind of made its way out of that dark period to flourish into what it is today. And were you there for that point?
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be the succession between Don, who was the founder of the company, and his kids. And that was 96. And it was a tumultuous time. I think there's a book. Actually, I wish I knew the name of the book, but there's a book written about the transition from Don to his kids. And that at that point, so it would have been 1997, I think it was 97. I might get my years off by a bit. And then the company became half owned by Don's kids. There's 7 children. I happen to be a Smith. I'm not one of Don's kids. And the other half owned by its employees. So that's the way that the company is today. And I think that's been the foundation of its trajectory since the succession. And like I said, as well, since the market, and never really forgetting where the company came from, I think, is being a builder. I mean, Ellisdon does many more things than just pure building construction, but it's able to do all those things because it is a relied upon and respectable builder.
What do you think, if there was a few things that you could distill down that attribute to the longevity of the company and the retention of employees, what do you think that would be, in your opinion, that's kept it going so hard for so long? Because it's rare. Like, you don't see a force like that. I'm going to use the construction industry as an example. It's rare to see a company that has that amount of success and has built a brand like that. I think it's quite rare. There's a few people that most people could probably name off the top of their head. But what do you think attributed to Ellisdon's longevity, especially through that critical juncture where they were transferring ownership?
I think the core group of people that were at Ellisdon, and I would give Jeff Smith, who's the CEO of the company, a ton of credit by nurturing and preserving the culture of the company. And the culture of the company is, we deliver on our promises. We always hold true to our values. We're trustworthy. We're respectful. We're respectful of others. We are innovative. We're nimble. But we're basically decent human beings, and we're going to treat our clients and our subcontractors and anybody who deals with us in a mutual respectful, trustworthy way. And I think that culture is what will survive fads and trends and all different changes. That's one thing for sure. And I don't think there's one person at Ellisdon that doesn't understand that that's the way we do business. When you show up at the door and you're just hired, that is made very clear to you that there's no other option. That's the way that you will do business. You will treat people with respect. You will be a good listener. You will be humble. You'll abide by our standard of our ethics. So that, to me, that's the core. The other part of it is you need a good group of people, and Ellisdon has been blessed with a good group of people that some of them have remained at the project execution level. Some of them have risen to become, senior executive leaders or senior management positions, but they've all shared a competitive determination to not only preserve that culture that Ellisdon had, but to change and evolve with the market and provide services to clients and listen to what our clients wanted. And, I think what I think a lot of clients from Ellisdon would say is that Ellisdon, we're accountable. Like, we'll listen to our clients. We will deliver the possible to them, not the impossible, but we would try and steer them away from the impossible, obviously. And I kind of think that it might sound a bit soft and wishy-washy, but I'll quote Jeff as saying, the difference in work, what's important about dealing with Ellisdon is the experience. So what is your experience? If you're a customer and you're buying construction services, like, what is the experience like for you? And, you and I were talking before about reflecting and holding true to your own personal values. And Ellisdon as a company wants to hold true to those values. So we want the experience with the client to be respectful, full of honest, openness, mutually accountable, like holding each other accountable and having open, frank dialogue to help come up with a solution. And I think that if you think about what you're doing, you're offering a service to clients who they don't really want to go through a construction process. What they want is the end product. So, get that over with quickly and with some certainty around cost and time, but don't make it painful. And if you start with the answer and work your way backwards, it helps you to deliver those services. So I think, in a long-winded answer to your question, I think that's what the combination of those two or three things have really made Ellisdon, a long-term successful construction service provider.
As you were coming up from being a newly appointed executive in BC and you're young and you're quote unquote climbing the ladder through Ellisdon, there's obviously a level of responsibility that you're given. And how do you navigate that when somebody is relying on you wholeheartedly to deliver an arm of a business or keep something running? How are you able to manage that? And how are you able to navigate those situations where you're going to stumble and fall a lot? But how do you keep that open and honest dialogue with your clients and with your stakeholders and manage the client-stakeholder relationship? Because you're kind of caught in the middle of that. How do you successfully navigate that as somebody that may be coming into it for the first time, where they're going to have people that are relying on them to produce a certain dollar amount or a certain amount of business per year? And then you've also got all of the project stakeholders that are looking for the execution and the teams that you have to manage. How do you navigate that whole situation as a first timer? Maybe looking back on it now, what could you say somebody that's getting into it for the first time?
Well, I guess in hindsight, what I knew then and what I know now and I think I said that earlier, are two different things. And, I think a certain amount of my survival was I'd label as, the ignorance part of, lack of knowledge to help me survive a lot of things that, there were traps or pitfalls or all kinds of opportunities to fail that I didn't even know were possible. So it didn't really worry me or bother me. I'm pretty straightforward in the way that I think. My instincts are pretty grounded. So what I mean by that is I believe, and maybe it sounds like a country boy thing, but I believe if you prepare and you work really hard and you deal with the facts, that eventually you'll get your turn. Now that like, I know that can sound a bit, what's the word? Pollyanna or pie in the sky, but I believe that to be true. You have to be consistent. You have to be consistently ethical. You have to be determined, but you can never drift away from the facts. Now, that may be the engineer in me that is very objective, and I am an objective thinker. And I didn't have I didn't have like this unrelenting belief that don't worry, everything's going to work out. That was not the case. I was pretty much terrified the entire first couple of years in that management role because I didn't have self-confidence, because I didn't have a track record to rely on. I wasn't sure that everybody around me had faith in me. And I wasn't, quite frankly, sure of who I could trust that was around me. And I think it would have been convenient for people to see me fail. But maybe my motivation was fear. I don't know, but it just seemed to work.
Was there any sort of self-talk that you would have with yourself that would help you through those situations?
That's a great question. I probably do that more now than I did then. And if I did it then, I don't really remember what it was, but I was, again, at the risk of repeating myself, I think that sometimes when you're that inexperienced, you may not have known how deep the hole was that you were actually in. And so you're like, well, this can't be that bad. And, in retrospect, there were a few things where they seem to resolve themselves through good luck. And, that the one thing it probably isn't a direct answer to your question, but the one thing that I did learn as I grew and had more responsibility was, that there's all kinds of advice out there that's offered to you. And just because it's offered doesn't mean A, that you have to take it, or B, that it's any good. And, there's a one piece of advice I would give somebody is, don't be dismissive of advice. But like a lot of things that come for free, they're not really worth that much. So if you're responsible for the outcome of something, then it needs to be based on the information that you have processed yourself and that you're comfortable with. Just doing something because somebody else says it's a good idea. Like, you may have your entire team, like in my case, you may have your entire team with double the experience that you have or more so, saying this is what we should do. But, you still have to make your own decision. Now, it may be the same decision they're guiding you towards, but if you don't feel it or the facts don't tell you to do it, then you need to have the courage to make the decision that you believe in. Because if the ship goes down, you'll wish that it was because of the decision you made, not because of the decision you relied on from other people. Like, if you're going to own it, you might as well be all in. That is one thing I've learned. And, and I've told people that for some time, that that's your moment of reckoning as a leader. You know that there's a bunch of advice, and you want to still the chatter, and you want to think things through, and you want to take a piece of everybody's comments, but then you want to make a decision because it's yours. Glory is shared by the masses. A loss is shared by you alone. When you're the leader, you're the only person taking it. So you might as well make it your own.
Now, if we're talking about today, or maybe 6 years ago, as you were the executive vice president, what would you do if you had a big decision to make? Do you have a routine of a way that you think about how you're going to come up with an answer, and still the chatter of everybody else pointing their fingers in the direction that you should go?
I wouldn't boast that I'm a good listener, but I managed to listen. First of all, let's get one thing straight. There's a ton of bright people in Ellisdon, a ton. So you can, it's pretty easy to surround yourself with great people. And I found where my greatest opportunities to add value were to bring out the best in all those bright people, to create an atmosphere where people could voice their opinions and they would be comfortable challenging either me or other people around them, and letting people have their say, and, having a bit of laughter, creating an environment where there wasn't tension and there wasn't anxiety. Like, that's not always possible, but I did try to do that. I like process. I like routine. I like to know that the work has been done. Like if we're talking about pursuing a job and making a tough decision on what's our final price going to be, what's our duration, and what's our staff count look like, we would make those decisions based on as much objective inputs as we possibly could. Like ultimately you'd want it to make a team decision, but that's sometimes unrealistic. Like at the end of the day, somebody has to decide. And I usually felt comfortable doing that because I had really good people with me, and I think we supported one another. There was a few times when I would make a decision and I could tell I was by myself, and and you'd walk away and you'd be rethinking the whole thing. And then, I always had one or two confidants that I could take aside, and that's the other nice thing about Ellisdon, the whole boss sort of thing. It's not really a thing. Like, I mean, you really do work together as a team. Like I had no problem being accountable for my decisions, and I always wanted to be supportive of the people that I work with and make sure that I had their back. And I think that allowed the relationship to be, extremely functional and one that was very respectful, right? So I would get really open dialogue. Say, Tim, I don't think you've really thought this through because we should be thinking about this, this, and this. And I would usually say, well, why didn't you say that? We were all in a room together. Well, I did find people the odd time would like, well, I didn't want to challenge you in front of the group. And I'm like, I think we're past that. Like, for sure you can say it, because if I think it's a free for all in the room, I'm not shy. I'm going to say something. But anyways, to answer your question about making a decision, I think you take in information, you analyze it objectively, you follow a process that's objective, and you make a decision based on the facts, and you try to remove emotion from it.
And if you got in a situation where you went out on a limb and made a bad decision yourself, how does a team support you after if it wasn't the right decision?
That's a trick question. If you make a bad decision and you come back to the bench and people are booing and hissing, well, as much as I just said, well, we don't really have that boss stigma atmosphere at Ellisdon, there's a certain level of respect that people are not going to try and undermine their leader. But, I think and I would say this in a general sense, not just about me. I think, as a leader, the one thing I've learned, and I've obviously learned it at Ellisdon, and I've learned it from people that were previously my leaders, my mentors, that when there's something bad happens, you don't throw anybody under the bus, you own it. So, and when you do that because that's what you're supposed to do. And to me, it wasn't something I contemplated doing. I knew that if I made a decision and it went bad, I don't know, it's just a natural instinct for me to jump on the hand grenade. Like, if it's bad, I'm going to do it. Like, because ultimately all the decisions have to be the responsibility of the leader. And like I said before, if it's something good, you're just a part of the group, right? Because that's true. That's true. I mean, I don't think I ever had an experience where people second guessed my decisions, at least out loud to me. So maybe they were thinking bad things and I just didn't pick up on it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. So to kind of shift gears here and go into a little bit of detail about the industry, I was hoping that you could speak to a little bit about how the market has changed from the way it used to be, and how P3 partnerships are coming into play, and what a P3 partnership is, and where you see the future of those going and why they're important at this day and age.
I think whether it's P3 or any other form of procurement, like a construction contract, like any other contract, it's, there's a monetary exchange for goods or services or both. So, a construction contract is there's compensation for creating an asset at the end of the day. And the thing about a construction contract is it's not all, like when you buy a car, the risk of manufacturing that car belongs to the manufacturer. So you're only going to pay for that car when you can drive it off the lot. In a construction contract, in a traditional sense, the owner or the developer of a property, or whether it's the government or it's private sector, hires a design team to design a product. And based on that design, they would hire a contractor to build it. So any flaws in the design or any challenges with the design, then the developer or the owner per se owns that risk. So it's not a pure risk transfer. That's the more traditional build model, what we're talking about in the 90s. So now if you think about risk transfer, which drives a lot of procurement models like P3. So P3 is a public-private partnership. So if you look at it from the perspective of the P3 model, says to the private sector, I want an operating hospital. I need it to be, and I'm going to give you the overall description of it and the operating criteria of it and what they call the output specifications. It's really then it becomes a design build obligation. So the risk is now transferred. So it transferred away from the public sector into the contractor and the contractor's design team to meet the output specifications. So the operating criteria, the space criteria, the performance criteria of the documents have to be met by a design team. And there's a fixed certain sum to be paid by the public sector to the private sector in exchange for this operating facility. And that money is only paid when that operating facility is not only built, but tested and proved that it meets the output specifications. So that risk transfer concept brings about a totally different role for the general contractor. The general contractor now becomes, it has an architectural team, architectural firm on its team. It has structural engineers, mechanical, electrical engineers, and all the other disciplines associated with building a facility like that. And you have to coordinate those groups and you have to manage those groups, and because you're taking risk on the documents that they're now producing. So contractors really were reinventing themselves as a result of the P3 model to become design managers, to which we probably weren't before, to become commissioning and performance. I wouldn't say I'll use the term experts loosely, but to learn how to turn over a building, to learn how to integrate medical equipment into the base design so that it can be built once and efficiently, to learn how to, be a little more efficient with design and design uses, like, simple things like like a converged network so that you can use the same network to run the BAS of the building automated system with operating the medical connectivity on those different things like patient monitoring and security systems and, all the different systems that go into a building, and trying to find those efficiencies. So that P3 model became the new competitive mechanism. So you not only had to know how to build fast and efficiently, you had to know how to work with design teams to come up with the most efficient solution that would obviously drive the capital price down. And that's where the competition was in what value proposition you're bringing. So that's changed the construction industry, I think, for the better. It would have started in 2003 when P3 really started in earnest in Ontario.
And you think that's going to continue to be the way of the future, or do you see it changing again in a few years? Is there an aspect of it, or is there something else that you think that you would like to see or that could help shape the industry again?
I think that risk transfer will continue to evolve as long as the outcomes continue to be certain. So in other words, if that risk transfer doesn't bear out to be a positive experience, go back to the term experience for a client, then it likely won't last. But hopefully our industry is maturing and understanding that risk transfer is a major responsibility, and you need to do it with great amount of effort and preparedness and planning and objective measures to come up with the right cost estimate and the right forecasted schedule for the projects. Then the outcomes won't be bumpy and there won't be catastrophic failures. I think if the model fails, it will be in large part because our industry doesn't manage the risk properly. I think as long as our industry is mature and wise enough to carry on and continue to manage risk, then those risks will continue to be brought to us. And that, to me, I think as a contractor, that's a bit of a proud moment because you become the leader in the project. And I'm not dismissing what design consultants do, but the contractors have for a long time taken the risk. So it does make sense that they take on more control and responsibility in order to manage that risk. So I think as long as our side of the equation can handle it, that means the building industry, and not just general contractors, but subcontractors as well, then it will be to our benefit.
One of the things, I was reading an article the other day, and it was, I can't remember who published the article, but it was about an interview that you did. And one of your quotes was that sustainability and sustainable building requires a sustainable workforce. And right now we're going through some labor shortages. And I think that's nationwide. I think it's North America wide. I think we're seeing a dip in skilled labor to get these projects done. How are you thinking about that right now? And how do you foresee us overcoming that hurdle?
How am I thinking about that right now? I think when you were asking me that question, my immediate first reaction was emotion was guilt. I mean, I've been 35 years in this business. I haven't really done anything about the labor shortage. I've probably complained about it. I've probably talked about it, but I've physically brought, anybody into the industry. But, so there's no sense whining about it. But I think there's a bunch of solutions. One is I think we need to talk about, celebrate, and socialize the idea that being a tradesman is a profession, or tradesperson, sorry. It takes you 4 years to become an engineer. It takes you 4 years to become an electrician. What's the difference? Being an engineer actually doesn't make you job ready. It makes you ready to go into a place of employment and begin learning how to apply the theory that has been taught to you. I mean, I had an opportunity to do a talk at Queen's, which is my alma mater, and I talked to a couple of profs at lunchtime, and we talked about the separation between theory and practice. And I think I was yearning for the practical, and I think that's how I ended up in the construction business. But going back to the trades role, and that talking about it in high schools and public schools and in social settings, and thinking about, how your daughter could be a mechanical pipe fitter, or how your son could be a carpenter, and how that is a proud and honorable profession, is a good place to start. And, the training and the availability of it, and just really the stigma of working on a construction project. They're well-paid jobs. They are, to me, the opportunities to meet new people and work on exciting projects and walk away at the end of the day and look back and say, hey, I was a part of that, is something significant. And being in the fresh air, and they're transferable trades, and you walk around the job site now, and I'm thrilled to see some happy, smiling young faces. So that's a place where we could start. I think we can just make it easier to become a tradesperson. And I just don't think that is the case now. I'm thrilled with when I hear my son talk about some of his buddies that have gone in to become tradespeople. And he'll come and talk to me about it, pretty excited. He goes, oh, so-and-so went on to be an electrician, or so-and-so's gone on to be a carpenter. I think that's pretty neat to hear.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things you mentioned to me before we went live here, when we were having some dinner, was about building your own personal brand.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. It's really struck a chord with me. What do you mean by building your personal brand?
Well, I think it's really and we'll have to talk around this because I really want to be clear about my point. My point is that, when someone says your name to somebody else who knows you, an immediate image will pop into their mind, and they have this whole perception of you. And I'm not saying, I don't want to say to people, you should be worried about what other people think about you. You want them to like you. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we all have a certain view of how we have this view of our own personal image. I think we all need as people to gain a certain amount of self-awareness to understand, okay, how do people perceive me? It's not about what I think about myself. It's what are my peers? What is my wife or my significant other, or my children or my friends? What do they think about me? And then you have to reflect back to think, Jesus, that really what I want them to, is that what I want to be known for? I want them to think of me as a person who's honest and hardworking and respectful of others. So if you think back on your day's work and you try and evaluate some of the situations you were in, did you really conduct yourself to give them that impression? So that's what I mean by your brand. And your brand isn't like, I'm the most popular person and you don't want to become a pleaser or the party person or the person who buys coffee for everybody at the office. That's not how you create a brand. You create a brand by, I know Colin, and here's what I think of him. He strikes me, the first thought that comes to my mind, he's a hardworking guy. He's the first guy in the office. He's always there to help you. He listens really well, and you can trust him with anything, and he's always got your back. He's a great team person. Like, wouldn't that be terrific for people to think of you that way? And again, it's not something that we have to be down on ourselves about. We just have to be aware. Hey, this is the image I want to portray for myself. It takes work to get there. Is that similar to what we talked about before? I want to make sure I'm consistent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the other things you mentioned to me was, tying directly into that, was how people chase metrics to gain what they think is the brand.
Yeah, I think that we do live in a world, if we're in the private sector, we are responsible for, it's a dollars and cents business, and we're not in business if we're not profitable. And that profit can't come at a cost of your culture. The profit can only be delivered if it's in keeping with your company's values, which are, I'm assuming most company values are, the highest level of ethics, honesty, and respectful treatment of the people that they work with. And then if you conducted yourself in that manner and you're still profitable, then I would call that successful. So I think that, we can celebrate success. Like if you take the construction business and say you can celebrate the success of a project, in my mind, only if it meets the criteria that it was in keeping with your values. And going back to the comment about the experience, if the experience was respectful, honest, open, and mutually accountable, then it was a good experience, and then the project was successful. And that is how you can measure yourself. You can't measure yourself solely in dollars and cents, because that may drift away from what your value proposition is. So, and I think as we as individuals, and we want to measure ourselves successfully, is like, okay, I delivered X number of dollars of profit to my company. Does that mean I'm successful? It means that you're doing something right. But if that is done at the expense of the people that you work with, if people feel they're disrespected or they're not trusted or they haven't been made better by you, then you haven't done your job as a leader. So I think that it has to be all encompassing. I think that's success, is that do the people that you work with still want to work with you? Do the people that you've helped develop, do they feel enriched for working with you? Did you grow as a person? Did you learn from the people around you? And, that might sound all grandiose and soft, but it's totally true that I think that, there's a 360-degree analysis of success.
The last piece to this that I wanted to touch on was something that you brought up, and I think if you're comfortable with it, and not a lot of people know, but is mindfulness practice, and how you feel that could be a good tool for somebody that may be getting into business. Maybe they're out of school or they're a bit younger. How have you seen the impact of mindfulness and meditation on evening out the peaks and valleys in your day-to-day experience as a human?
Well, first of all, I would say, if you asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would have shied away from answering it. But today I feel pretty comfortable. I mean, I don't think there's many people that aren't aware of meditation as a potential benefit in their lives. I wouldn't say that the same number of people practice it. I skirted around it for a number of years, read articles, read books, and decided I would go down the path and explore it. And I have found benefit to it. Now, am I a particular expert, or, I'm talking about something simple, like once a day, if I'm fortunate enough to take 15 minutes and just take a pause and do a guided meditation. And everything I've read about it actually does come true. And what you're doing is you're providing space to pause and think and create. Some people don't like the word patience, but I think you're creating a space for patience. And, it's been repeated in a few, I'm probably going to butcher this by paraphrasing, but for everything that happens to us. So there's, let's take an easy analogy. You're driving down the highway and somebody cuts you off and you immediately have an angry reaction. So the stimulus is the person cut you off. The response, which is immediate, is you're angry, flip the bird or whatever you do. But there is a place in between the stimulus and the response. Your mind has to create that space for you to pause. And, I know that sounds a little bit philosophical for a construction guy, but it makes sense to me. It seems very rational. And I think if you can teach your mind to slow down, then you'll create that space. And maybe you'll give better, more well thought out responses to the stimulus. And you be I think I'm always surprised by how effective a pause is. And I certainly would not have a reputation as somebody who leaves a lot of silent moments in a conversation, but I'm learning to go there. And, I'm also very curious about it. I'm fascinated by how the mind works. I wasn't always, but I have been in the last number of years.
If there's anybody that's maybe your age or younger, and they're kind of starting to become aware of mindfulness, and they're not sure that they're ready to take the plunge, what would you say to somebody like that?
Like what everybody else says to when you're curious, just Google it. So you would look up different apps online, although I heard an article about every time you download an app on your phone, it's just something that's stealing your data and your habits and will later come back to haunt you. But nonetheless, get a book on mindfulness. Just read about it. What does it mean? I don't meditation is for me, when I first started to think about the word meditation, the first thought that comes to mind is, Buddhist monks, or somewhere in, you're doing a serious retreat, and it's just something that's not in the ordinary world. Well, it most certainly is in the ordinary world. Many thousands of people meditate every day. And all they're doing is taking a quiet moment to slow their thoughts down and give themselves some space in their mind to help them deal with the fast-paced world that we're in. Like it's not complicated. So I would say just explore it. It's one of the few things I've found, probably the only thing, you cannot mess it up. Like you can't meditate wrong. It's like a thing. It's the first thing you learn is when you read about meditation. There's no such thing as doing it wrong. So it's easy to be successful because there's no wrong answer.
So now that you've segued out of executive vice president and you have relaxed your role within the company, what's next for you?
I think I'm enjoying doing what I'm doing. I've been able to offer some mentoring. I don't like to use the word mentoring because it sounds sort of like you've got something more to offer than the person has to offer. But it's not really the word. I guess a little wisdom I've been able to download to people that have taken up more responsibility at Ellisdon. I've enjoyed that. But, like with really strong, effective leaders, they don't need to be told anything repetitively. Like, you tell them something once and they pick it up and that's good, right? So I only have so many wise ideas to offer. So I'm soon going to tap myself out. So I've thought about eventually getting into coaching, professional development, I guess it would be. I had the benefit of having a coach when I was at Ellisdon from, I think, around 2004 to 2018, a gentleman by the name of Mike Lavelle, who is a tremendous, both a friend and a really wise mentor to me, and helping me grow as a person and helping me find my own self-awareness. And, I really enjoyed my time with Mike. I don't think I could ever aspire to his level, but, certainly having a conversation with somebody and maybe being able to guide them in certain directions and help them find what they already know, which is kind of what I felt like Mike's secret was. I think I would enjoy that. Certainly that'll take some change, takes some courage, right? You have to step outside your comfort zone if you want to do something like that. So,
well, hopefully enough people can listen to this, and if they do, they can help push you along. Because I think that in our few short interactions that we've had since I've moved out to Ontario, I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and I think that you have a gift definitely for it. And it would be a shame if you didn't step out there and try. I would be disappointed.
No, you're very generous.
I'd be your first customer.
Right.
But I think this is a great place to kind of wrap up and start to wind the conversation down. Is there anything that you would like to say to the young people in the construction industry, or to their parents, or to anybody that may be influencing them? Is there anything that you'd like to say to them?
I guess what I would offer is that I feel incredibly fortunate that I found the construction business, and the opportunities that were there for me have served me well, served my family well. I worked hard, but there were opportunities for me to deliver the best I could deliver. And, there was always something more for me, something to grow into. And I think that's what the construction business can offer, whether you're a young engineer, graduate, a technologist from a college, or a person who's thinking about going into the trade. If you're going to become a carpenter, that doesn't mean you can't become a construction superintendent or a project manager. Or I would think that somebody who understands the practical side of the business would bring a tremendous amount of value into management. I graduated as an engineer. We knew a lot of stuff that were in books, but we didn't learn a lot of stuff that was practical and in the field. So I think still that the opportunity is there. I mean, it's been a long time. So in 35 years, I think when I first started working in the construction business, I thought, what happens when everything gets built? We'll all get laid off. And what I forgot was populations change and people's needs change for infrastructure, and stuff wears out and stuff falls down, and buildings and infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. So it seems like it's a pretty self-sustaining industry. So I would encourage people to try it, and I would encourage people to explore it, and I would encourage people to ask questions and try and learn about what the different options are for them. And I think that I've met a lot of tremendous people in this business, not only people that have worked with at Ellisdon, but subcontractors, architects, engineers, suppliers, buyers, clients of ours. And, I've met just an incredible number of really good people. So I don't think that that's going to change.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have me over to your place and to speak and to help motivate me, and in turn, I hope help motivate others to get in the industry and get educated and start putting their best foot forward. If I know you're a pretty low key guy, but if anybody wanted to get in contact with you, is there a best place to do that?
I think people could reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, so that's probably the easiest thing to do. Yeah.
Just Tim Smith?
Yeah.
Tim Smith on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? Any parting words that you'd like to put out there before we wrap up?
I'm pretty careful about the wisdom I distribute. So, I think that I'll just leave people with this, that, people with a lot of experience in both life and their profession, we're not natural teachers and natural coaches. And I also think that people who are aspiring or starting off in their career or midterm are not natural students or naturally inquisitive to ask people for advice or to seek advice or know even what advice to ask for. So I would encourage both people, like people that are at my stage of their career and age or a little older or whatever, to step outside their comfort zone and ask people if there's anything that they can help them with. And if you ever want to ask me a question, I'm there to give you some input or share my experiences. And I would also encourage people who may not think that they need advice, or those that do, to strike up the courage or strike up the self-confidence to ask for it. Because I think there's a gap. I think there's those of us that have it, are fortunate to have experience. We don't know how to share it. And I think people that are in need of it aren't really sure what they're in need of, and are maybe a little too shy to ask for it. So maybe that's my parting words.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much. And it's been great. I hope we can catch up again at some point and do a part 2. But until then, thanks so much for coming on, Tim. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Colin. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey everyone, Colin again. Thank you so much for listening. I had an awesome time, and I hope you were able to walk away with a little nugget of value or information that you can plug directly into your life and or business. To help me grow this thing, I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button and share this with your friends. For more information about Tools of the Trade, check out toolspodcast.com, where you can find all of my social media links, show notes, episodes, and while you're there, hit the hook me up button to subscribe to my newsletter. Until next time, love you, thank you, and remember, there is no proof that life is meant to be taken seriously.